Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The loading dock of Valerian 9th stretched beneath perpetual twilight, where the Terminator line trapped the district in eternal dusk. Richard Cole hefted another container, ignoring the wet warmth spreading through his torn gloves. Blood again. The math was simple. Medical treatment cost 2 weeks' wages. New gloves cost 1 week. Bleeding cost nothing but pain, and pain was free. Move faster, meat. The Thurian dockmaster's throat sacs inflated with authority. Sundown shift starts in 10 minutes. Richard didn't respond. Words cost breath. Breath cost energy. Energy cost food. He'd learned that equation at 7, watching his parents die in a fire they could have escaped from if they hadn't gone back for the neighbor's children. The neighbors had lived. His parents had burned. Love, Richard had learned, was the most expensive thing in the universe. Another worker collapsed beside him, a Corvani female who'd been getting slower all week. The security drones dragged her away. By tomorrow, someone desperate would fill her position for half the standard wage. The dockmaster would pocket the difference. Everyone knew. No one said anything. Speaking up cost more than silence. Still vertical, Iron Boy? Vask wheezed beside him, trying again for camaraderie. Richard grunted non-committally. 3 days ago, Vask had been robbed. Yesterday, he'd asked Richard for a loan. Richard had calculated the odds of repayment, low, against the cost of refusing, 0, and walked away. Today, Vask was here but moving like a man who'd sold blood to buy food. Tomorrow, he probably wouldn't show up at all. The shift ended. Richard collected his pay, 2 flatbreads, a protein block the size of his thumb, a water flask that might be clean. The Thurian supervisor smiled, showing too many teeth. Productivity down 3%, human. Next week, maybe less pay, yes? Richard pocketed the food and left. Behind him, newer workers begged for advances, promised double shifts, offered services Richard didn't want to think about. He'd made those same offers once, before learning that dignity was a luxury the poor couldn't afford. His route home changed nightly. Predictability got you killed for half a protein block. Tonight he went through the Corvani gambling dens, past the synthetic meat plants that process things best not examined, around militia checkpoints where guards supplemented their income with casual violence. The warehouse district loomed like a cemetery for corporate ambitions. Richard's shelter hid in the bones of a failed terraforming company, 3 years claimed by right of violence. He'd killed the previous occupant when the junkie tried to knife him for his boots. The man had begged, claimed he had children. Everyone had children when they were dying. Richard froze, voices ahead, high, desperate, young. Please, we're just hungry. Not his problem. Other people's suffering was a hole you could pour your entire life into without filling. He started to circle around when he heard the response. Purple one's worth the most. Green ones will break in for the brothels. Through gaps between the slavers' bulk, Richard saw them. 3 small forms pressed against a dead-end wall. Children, maybe 7, 8 years old. The tactical part of his brain ran calculations. 3 armed adults versus 1 exhausted teenager. The math was clear. Walk away. 1 child sobbed, not the sharp sound of fear, but the broken whimper of acceptance. Richard had made that sound once, the night after his parents died, before learning that grief was another expense he couldn't afford. But something else cut through. They'd stopped begging. They'd accepted their fate with the resignation of creatures who'd learned the universe's cruelest lesson too young. That acceptance, that surrender, sparked something Richard thought he'd burned out. Rage. Not heroic rage. Just the bone-deep fury of someone who knew exactly what came next and found himself unwilling to let it happen. Not tonight. Not to them. His hand found a length of rebar. The math changed. 3 adults versus 1 teenager with nothing left to lose. Better odds than he'd had in years. The first slaver dropped with a wet crunch. Richard had aimed for the knee, not the skull. Crippled enemies screamed, drawing attention. Dead ones just lay there. The man's shriek cut through the alley as Richard grabbed his shock prod. "Run!" he roared at the children. They didn't move. Terror paralysis. Richard had seen it in new dock workers during their first accident. The slavers spun, weapons activating. Stupid human. Richard took the shock prod hit deliberately, letting it drive him forward into the speaker's guard. His stolen weapon found the slaver's kidney. The man convulsed. His partner's blade opened Richard's side, deeper than planned. Richard stumbled but kept himself between the slavers and the children. "Take me," he gasped, playing his only card. Young human male, strong back, worth more than children. The standing slaver laughed. "You're bleeding out, meat. 5 minutes, maybe 10. Richard smiled, tasting copper. "Then I've got 5 minutes. He fought like the doc had taught him. No honor, no technique, just savage arithmetic. Every motion had to count. He bit through an ear, clawed at eyes, used the children's screams to mask his movements. The slavers expected desperation. Richard gave them calculation, each injury designed to reduce their efficiency, not win points. When the last slaver fled, dragging his partners, Richard collapsed. His side leaked warmth onto cold concrete. 3 faces appeared above him. The violet-skinned girl pressed small hands against his wound. "Don't die, please!" The dark-haired green girl was already tearing her dress into strips. The golden-haired one began singing, something that made his nervous system momentarily forget pain. "Move," Richard managed. "They'll come back." "Where?" the violet girl demanded. Richard pointed toward his sector. The girls half carried, half dragged him through darkness. They were stronger than they looked, or adrenaline gave them strength. Richard directed them with weak gestures, fading in and out. His shelter materialized through pain haze. 3 years of paranoid preparation had created something invisible: false walls, hidden entrance, emergency supplies. The girls dragged him inside, immediately ransacking his medical kit. "I seen this before," the dark-haired girl muttered, threading a needle. "When Papa's workers got hurt, hold him." Richard wanted to protest the waste of supplies, but the golden-haired girl's song pulled him under. He woke to worried whispers and small hands checking his forehead. "Still hot, sick-making, spreading. Need medicine." "Where from?" "No money." Richard tried to sit up. Pain drove him back down. 3 pairs of hands pressed him flat. "No moving," the violet girl commanded. "You saved us. Now we save you." Through fever fog, Richard studied them. 7, maybe 8 years old. The violet girl had throat markings that glowed faintly. Expensive bioengineering. The green girls looked related. One serious, one gentle. "You're not street kids," he mumbled. They exchanged glances. The violet girl raised her chin. "We runned away." "Ran," the dark-haired girl corrected automatically, then caught herself. "From where?" Richard asked, though he was already calculating. Bioengineered markings, automatic grammar correction, the way they held themselves despite hunger. These were rich kids, noble kids, political disaster kids. "From home," the golden girl said simply. "They wanted us to fight, always fight, for everything." "So we left," the serious one added. "We thought it would be fun." "How long?" Richard asked. 32 days, the violet girl whispered. "We ate garbage, drank bad water, people kicked us." Richard studied their faces, hollow cheeks, scared eyes, the particular gauntness that came from eating spoiled food because it was better than nothing. Rich or poor, they were children learning the universe's economics the hard way. "Water," he instructed. "Boil first. Red container has clean-making tablets." They obeyed eagerly. Over the next days, as Richard fought infection, he taught them. Not from kindness, he told himself, but because their survival meant his. If they died, who would bring water? Who would watch for slavers while he slept? Never drink standing water. Sleep in shifts. Chew slow when hungry. Tricks the stomach. They absorbed every word. These rich kids were learning what Richard had learned at their age. Survival was mathematics, and mathematics didn't care about your birthright. Day 7, the fever broke. Richard woke to find 3 small bodies curled around him, sharing warmth. They'd given him their only blanket. The violet girl's eyes opened instantly. Street reflexes now. "You're better." She shook the others. They hugged him carefully, avoiding his bandages. Richard's chest tightened with something he didn't want to name. "Need food," the dark-haired girl said practically. Richard started to rise. No, they chorused. "Still hurt," the violet girl insisted. "Tell us where food is." Richard almost refused, but their determined faces stopped him. They'd survived 32 days. They'd earned trust, or at least a chance. Corvani Restaurant, 2 districts over. They dump excess at shift change. Quick in, quick out. Guards shoot scavengers. They nodded solemnly and left. Richard spent 3 anxious hours calculating probabilities of disaster. When they returned with half-full containers, something cracked in his chest. Some wall he'd built the night his parents chose strangers over their own son. "Nobody saw us," the golden girl reported proudly. They divided the food into 4 equal portions. "No," Richard said. "You 3 share. I can wait." "If one eats, all eat," the violet girl interrupted. "That's what you said." Richard blinked. Had he? Maybe in fever dreams, channeling his mother's naive philosophy before she'd burned for it. "That's different." "If one eats, all eat," the dark-haired girl repeated, pushing food toward him. Richard looked at these 3 girls who dragged him through hostile streets, nursed him with stolen supplies. They stared back with absolute determination. He took the food. "I'm Taya," the violet girl said suddenly. "Athena," the serious one added. "Freya," the golden girl smiled. "Richard," he replied, though they knew from his fevered ramblings. "Tell us about Earth," Taya requested. Richard hesitated. He barely remembered Earth. His parents had brought him here at 5, chasing work that never materialized. But he told them what he could. Blue skies instead of eternal twilight, real wood that grew from soil, his father's workshop that smelled like possibilities before it became ash. "Your parents sound nice," Freya said softly. "They were stupid," Richard corrected. "Died saving neighbor kids. Got them out, but building fell. They chose strangers over their own son." Silence stretched. Then Athena spoke. "Our parents make us fight for food, even when there's lots. Say it builds character." "Mine says I'm too soft," Freya whispered. "That kindness is weakness." "Mine says only winners deserve love," Taya added. Richard looked at these 3 girls who'd been given everything except what mattered. "Your parents are wrong." "So were yours," Athena said quietly. "But maybe being wrong for good reasons is better than being right for bad ones?" Richard didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like the sentiment he'd trained himself not to feel. Richard watched them constantly now, cataloging their survival potential. Taya led naturally, but had respiratory weakness. He'd heard her wheeze during cold nights. Athena was competent, but too willing to sacrifice herself for the others. Freya's singing actually did something. Bioengineered harmonics, probably, but that made her valuable to the wrong people. Winter was coming. Valerian's cold season killed hundreds of homeless. His shelter could protect 1 person, maybe 4. They'd freeze or starve or die from untreated illness. He had antibiotics hidden, food cached, but those would run out. Then what? The calculation was simple. He couldn't save them. Not properly. Not long term. On day 12, Richard made his decision while they slept. He ate his hidden protein bar, strategic reserves, he told himself, not betrayal. The lie tasted worse than the stale bar. You're planning something, Athena said. He hadn't heard her wake. Sleep. You're leaving us. Statement, not question. Richard didn't deny it. You need more than I can give. The Palace District has shelters, orphanages. That split up siblings, Athena interrupted. Send us to different homes, or back to our parents. You'd be alive. Alone. She sat up, her young face serious in the darkness. Taya gave away jewelry for medicine when Freya got sick. Freya sang in markets for food even though slavers might notice. We choose each other. Always. Pretty sentiment. Won't keep you warm. Neither will being alone. Her amber eyes held no doubt. We know what alone feels like. This is better. This is temporary. Everything's temporary. Doesn't make it worthless. Richard wanted to explain that sentiment was luxury, that choosing each other was just multiplying pain. But looking at this 7-year-old who stitched wounds and quoted philosophy, he found the words wouldn't come. The next morning he announced, "We're going somewhere." They packed eagerly, trusting him completely. Richard led them through morning shadows toward the Palace District. He'd leave them near the gates, create a distraction, let guards find them. They'd be processed as orphans, given clean beds, regular meals. They'd hate him, but they'd live. The palace gates loomed like teeth. Richard's instincts screamed retreat. "Listen," he whispered urgently. "When I run, you go to those guards. Say you're orphans. Parents died in the port accident. You want work. Understand?" "Why would you run?" Taya asked, suspiciously. Before Richard could answer, Freya tripped. Her collar shifted, revealing her throat. The markings there, intricate, glowing, faintly gold, weren't just bioengineering. They were nobility seals, dynasty markers. "By the 3 moons, a guard breathed. "Alert the palace. We found them, the runaway heirs." Chaos erupted. Guards swarmed from everywhere. "Kidnapper!" the commander roared, pointing at Richard. "Human trash took the royal heirs." "No!" Taya screamed as guards grabbed her. "He saved us! We ran away! He saved us!" "Trauma syndrome," someone muttered. "The humans brainwashed them." Armored hands drove Richard to his knees. A rifle butt cracked against his skull. Through the chaos, he heard the girls fighting, screaming, demanding. "His name is Richard Cole," Taya commanded with sudden royal authority. "Remember that, Richard Cole." "We'll find you," Athena shrieked as servants wrapped her in blankets. "Promise," Freya sobbed, reaching for him. "We promise." A boot connected with Richard's ribs, tearing his stitches. He didn't resist. This was the plan. They'd forget him within days, distracted by warm beds and proper meals. Children's memories were mercifully short. The interrogation lasted hours. Where did you take them? What did you do? Why bring them back? Richard told the truth, found them, protected them, returned them. The interrogators didn't believe him. Truth was always more suspicious than lies. Finally, they dumped him at the spaceport, bleeding and broken. "Come near the palace again, human, and you die slowly," the commander spat. Richard dragged himself back to his shelter as night fell. The space felt cavernous. Their makeshift beds still held their shapes. Freya had forgotten her broken doll. Richard sat in darkness, touching the spots where they'd slept, and told himself he'd done right. They were safe, fed, warm. That was all that mattered. But their voices echoed, "We'll find you." Richard pressed palms against his eyes and, for the first time in 10 years, cried. Not for loss, he'd never really had them, but for what he'd almost let himself believe, that if one eats, all eat, that choosing each other meant something, that 3 little girls could see something worth saving in a dock rat who'd shared his bread. By morning, Richard Cole had vanished from Valerian 9th, stowed away on a freighter bound for anywhere else. He'd learned his lesson twice now. Caring meant losing. This time, the lesson would stick. 22 years later, the Perseverance's salvage scanners painted the derelict yacht in false colors, heat signatures, metal composition, energy readings all negative. Captain Richard Cole studied the data with eyes that had learned to see traps in everything. 22 years had turned the scarred teenager into something harder. The beard hid old knife wounds. The muscle came from decades of necessary violence. But the eyes, those remained the same, still calculating, still expecting the universe to collect its debts. Too clean, his security chief Adam muttered. No micro debris, no dust patterns. Someone's been maintaining that ghost. Or someone wants us to think it's maintained, Richard countered. But they needed this score. The crew hadn't been paid in 2 months. The ship needed repairs. The math was simple. Take the risk or slowly starve. Boarding team with me. Everyone else. Engines hot for emergency burn. The yacht's airlock opened too easily. Richard led the way, weapon ready, noting the pristine surfaces. No dust, no biological decay. The life support hummed at perfect efficiency. The lights died. The airlock slammed shut. Back to emergency lighting bathed everything in red. 3 figures emerged from concealed positions, moving with predatory grace. Richard's team raised weapons, but something in their silhouettes made his chest constrict. "Hold fire," he commanded. The center figure stepped forward. Violet skin that seemed to capture and reflect the emergency lights. Silver hair flowing like mercury. Throat markings pulsing with bioluminescent authority. Not just nobility, royalty. "Hello, Richard," Taya said, her voice carrying 22 years of patient hunting. "Did you really think children forget their first love?" Richard's hand trembled, not from fear, from memory. 8-year-old Taya burning with fever while he forced medicine between her lips. "Your Highness," he forced professional distance into his voice. "I think you're mistaking me." Athena materialized at his shoulder, her finger pressing against his ribs through his tactical vest. 7-inch laceration, slaver's knife. I stitched it with supply theft thread. The scar tissue would have my amateur pattern. She'd become what her childhood promised. Lethal precision in humanoid form. Green skin darkened to jade, muscles like coiled steel beneath armor that looked painted on. Twin plasma blades at her hips, and eyes that dissected him with surgical focus. "You still divide food equally," Freya added, stepping from shadows he hadn't even noticed. Where her cousins were sharp edges, she'd become curved danger, golden hair cascading over green skin that shimmered with pheromonic oils. When she spoke, her voice did something to his nervous system that should be illegal. "We've watched you for months. Every meal, same portions for everyone." "Coincidence," Richard said flatly. "Is this coincidence?" Taya produced something from her belt, a broken doll. Richard's mask cracked. "How?" "We went back," Athena said simply. "The day we turned 18, your shelter was occupied by a family with 3 children. They still had hope. We bought the entire warehouse district just to get her back." "That was 14 years ago," Richard said roughly. 14 years, 3 months, 6 days, Freya corrected. "We've been searching ever since." "Rich princesses have better things to do than hunt down dock trash who saved our lives," Taya interrupted. "Who taught us to survive? Who shared his last food with strangers?" Her voice carried hurt now, decades of it. "We weren't just playing, Richard. We meant every word." Richard looked at his crew, who stood frozen in confusion. "Return to the ship. Boss? Now." They retreated reluctantly. When the airlock sealed, Richard faced the 3 women who'd haunted him for 2 decades. "What do you want?" "You," they said in unison. "Be specific." "We want you to stop running," Taya said. "We want you to trust us the way we trusted you." "You were children." "So were you," Athena countered. 17 is still a child. But you made adult choices, life and death choices. Why are ours less valid? Because you didn't understand. We understood loyalty, Freya interrupted, her voice doing things to his nervous system. We understood that you were ours and we were yours. The rest was just time. The yacht's hidden conference room erupted with data. Taya manipulated the holograms with practiced efficiency, showing systematic atrocities. My half-brother Kadrin took power 5 years ago, she explained. Father died of poison that mimics heart failure. Kadrin was very supportive during mourning. By the time we realized, he'd consolidated control. The holograms showed a man of impossible beauty, genetically crafted features, movements like water, eyes like black holes. He created the purifiers, Athena continued, jaw tight. Elite soldiers who raid noble houses, taking daughters for education. He breaks them, psychological torture, chemical dependency, surgical modifications. They come out as programmable dolls. Richard studied footage of girls being dragged from homes, his hands clenched. He's obsessed with collecting us, Freya said softly, her harmonics carrying undertones of old fear. Says it's his right as regent to marry all 3 princesses, to reunify the bloodlines. We have 40% of the military, Taya continued, 60% popular support, but we can't move because he has hostages, Richard finished, reading the tactical situation. Hundreds. If we attack directly, he kills them all. Athena's hand moved to her blade. We need someone outside the power structure, someone with no legal standing he can exploit. Someone disposable, Richard said flatly. Someone we trust, Taya corrected. Richard, we've tracked every job you've taken, every compromise, every life ended to protect your crew. You do what's necessary. That's who we need. And who we want, Freya added. An emergency transmission interrupted. The viewer showed Kadrin's perfect face, Richard's crew kneeling behind him in restraint collars. My dear sisters, Kadrin purred, your pet human's crew seems valuable to him. Single combat, him against me. If he wins, I abdicate and free everyone. If I win, his smile was winter. I claim all 3 of you and execute his crew slowly enough for him to watch each one beg. The transmission ended. Richard stared at his captured people, 15 souls who'd followed him through hell. I'll do it, he said immediately. You'll lose, Athena said bluntly. He's enhanced in ways that barely qualify as biological, faster, stronger, trained since birth. Then I'll lose, but my crew goes free. Or, Taya said slowly, you could trust us. We have a plan. But it requires something you've never given anyone, complete faith that will catch you when you fall. Richard looked at them, these women who'd searched for him for over 2 decades. What kind of plan? The kind where we all risk everything, Athena said. The kind where, if one falls, all fall, Richard finished. The words tasted like memory. And if one stands? All stand, Freya smiled. Together. The combat arena sprawled beneath Valerian's capital, ancient stone mixed with force fields, 50,000 citizens packed into seats, billions watching across 3 systems. Richard stood in the preparation chamber while Athena bound his hands. He's everything I'm not, she said quietly. In a fair fight, you're dead in 30 seconds. Good thing I don't fight fair. She smiled, sharp and proud. No, you fight like someone who learned violence as economics. Every move has to profit. She pressed something invisible into his palm. Neural disruptor, illegal in 17 systems. But it only works once and only for 3 seconds. That's not enough. It is if you trust us. She indicated tiny devices she'd attached to his armor. We've spent months infiltrating. Every guard, every noble with enhancements, even Kadrin's own armor. They're all carrying our little gifts. You're going to disrupt everyone? Everyone enhanced, Taya corrected, entering with the salvaged slaver knives. The common people, the unenhanced humans and basic Valerians, they'll remain standing. They'll see that power was always an illusion. The activation phrase, Freya said, kissing his forehead, her harmonics sharpening his reflexes rather than calming them, is something you taught us, something that became a revolution. Richard understood. If one eats, all eat. Trust us, Taya whispered, the way we trusted you when you fed us your last food. The arena floor felt like history repeating. Richard at 17, bleeding to protect strangers. Richard at 39, walking toward near-certain death for the same strangers, transformed by time. Kadrin waited at the center, beautiful as poisoned art. His armor was ceremonial, form-fitted, making him look like violence given aesthetic form. "The mongrel appears," Kadrin announced. "Look, citizens, this is what my sisters chose over pure blood. This is what they would pollute our throne with." Richard said nothing. Words were just another resource to conserve. The bell rang. Kadrin moved like water with murderous intent. His blade swept toward Richard's neck, too fast to block, too precise to dodge completely. Richard didn't try. Instead, he did what Doc mathematics had taught him. He made the hit cost something. The blade opened his shoulder instead of his throat. Blood painted sand. The crowd gasped. Kadrin smiled. First blood to... Richard's knife found the gap Athena had identified, a joint that prioritized beauty over protection. Not deep, but shocking. The Regent had never been touched in combat. The fight transformed. Kadrin's technique was flawless, but Richard fought like someone who'd learned violence as an exchange rate. Every perfect strike Kadrin landed, Richard turned into currency for crude damage. An elbow to the throat, a knee to the kidney, fingers and eyes. "Fight properly," Kadrin snarled, his composure cracking with his perfect nose. "I am," Richard grunted, taking another blade through his thigh to get close enough to bite through Kadrin's ear. The crowd had gone silent. This wasn't the elegant duel they'd expected. This was education in what desperation could do to technique. But Richard was losing. Blood loss, accumulated damage, simple mathematics of fighting someone barely human anymore. He dropped to one knee, Kadrin's blade at his throat. "Yield," Kadrin commanded. "Beg, and I might let you watch while I train your wives." Richard looked up at him. This creature who'd never been hungry, never calculated whether to eat or buy medicine. "You want to know what your sister saw in me? Enlighten me before you die." Richard smiled, tasting copper. "I know what things actually cost." He spoke the phrase that had defined resistance for 2 decades. If one eats, all eat. The neural disruptors activated, not just his, but hundreds throughout the arena. Every guard with enhancements collapsed. Every noble with genetic modifications writhed. Kadrin's perfect body betrayed him as his nervous system overloaded. But the common people remained standing. The unenhanced humans, the basic Valerians, the poor who'd never afforded augmentation. They stood while their superiors fell. Richard stood over Kadrin's twitching form. Around the arena, the crowd began to understand. The guards couldn't stop them. The nobles couldn't command them. Power had always been consensus, and consensus had just shifted. "Your sisters didn't need me to win," Richard told Kadrin. "They needed me to show everyone that your power was always borrowed. Take away the enhancements, the weapons, the fear, and you're just another hungry creature, except you never learned what to do with hunger." Someone in the crowd shouted, "If one eats, all eat." The chant spread like fire, not because Freya was manipulating them, but because they understood. They'd been hungry too. The medical ward smelled of regeneration gel and possibility. Richard drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of 3 presences that never left. 17 wounds, Taya reported when he woke fully. Massive blood loss, organ damage. Worth it, Richard croaked. No, Athena said sharply. We didn't search for 22 years just to watch you die proving a point. Then why? Richard asked, genuinely confused. You were children. I was just... The person who saw us, Freya interrupted. Not the Violet Princess or the twin duchesses. Just 3 scared, hungry kids. Do you understand how rare that was? After they rescued us, Taya explained, they put us through months of therapy, tried to convince us you'd manipulated us. But every night, we'd meet in secret and remind each other. The boy who shared his food, who bled for strangers. We made a pact, Athena added. When we came of age, we'd find you. And then we'd ask you something. Taya pulled out an old cracked cup from her belongings. We'd ask if you remembered. Richard stared at it. 3 children playing at ceremony, him humoring them because they'd look so serious. That was just children. So were you, Freya pointed out. 17 is still a child. But you made real choices. Why are ours less valid? Because you couldn't understand. We understood loyalty, Athena said. We understood that we found something worth keeping. The rest was just time. Richard looked at them. Brilliant, dangerous, devoted. They could have anyone. Yet they sat here, holding onto a broken cup and a childhood promise. The world isn't a fairy tale, he said. People change, love fades, promises break. You're right, Taya agreed. The children who made that promise are gone, but we're here, and we're choosing you. Not from childhood obligation, but as adults who know exactly what we're choosing. All 3 of you? We never learned to compete for affection, Athena explained. You taught us to share what mattered. And you matter, Freya added, her harmonics carrying truth deeper than words. But mostly, Taya said, taking his scarred hand, we're tired of being alone in crowded rooms. We've been surrounded by people for 22 years, and we've been alone since the palace guards took you away. I'm nobody, Richard said, a salvage captain with more scars than credits. You're the person who taught us that everyone is somebody, Freya replied. That principle just toppled a regime. Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of years. He'd spent 22 years believing caring meant losing. But 3 girls had cared so fiercely they'd found him across decades and star systems. They'd built a revolution on principles he'd taught them in desperation. They'd waited. I don't know how to be what you need, he admitted. Then we'll figure it out together, Athena said, the way we always have. Together, Taya agreed. Together, Freya smiled. Richard reached for the cracked cup. Maybe some promises were worth keeping. Maybe 3 princesses and a dock rat could build something from shared bread and stubborn love. If one eats, he said quietly. All eat, they responded. 6 months later, Valerian was bleeding. Richard stood in the council chamber, watching heated arguments through security feeds. The noble houses had accepted defeat, but not change. They smiled in public, pledged support, then sabotaged food distribution in their districts. 3 warehouses had burned this week. They're starving their own people to make us look incompetent, Athena reported, her tactical assessment brutally honest. We control the military, but they control the infrastructure. 17 dead in food riots yesterday, Taya added, exhaustion written in every line of her body. The people are starting to wonder if Kadron's order was better than our chaos. Richard studied the reports. This was the part fairy tales never mentioned, what happened after the tyrant fell. You need to make a deal. With the nobles? Freya's harmonics carried disgust. They supported Kadron. They profited from suffering. And they still own the distribution networks, the processing plants, the transport guilds. Richard had learned this lesson salvaging. Sometimes you dealt with bastards because bastards had what you needed. Give them something they want more than power, which is profit, Richard said simply. Make reform profitable. Tax breaks for nobles who hit food distribution quotas. Premium contracts for those who employ from the dock districts. Turn their greed into your tool. That's morally compromising, Taya said uncomfortably. That's survival, Richard corrected. You can have pure principles or fed people. Pick one. They picked fed people. The compromises tasted bitter, but fewer people died. Richard negotiated with noble houses, speaking their language of calculated self-interest. Some deals made his skin crawl. He made them anyway. 3 nobles were assassinated by radical reformists who called the sisters weak. Athena had to arrest their own supporters. The trials were public, the executions more so. Message sent. The new law applied to everyone. They hate us now, Freya said after the executions, her voice small. The people we're trying to save hate us. Good, Richard said harshly. Love is unstable. Fear and respect last longer. That's not what you taught us as children. I taught you to survive. This is what survival looks like at scale. But the real test came when the dock districts, Richard's own people, rioted against the new employment laws. They didn't want to work beside aliens, didn't want integrated neighborhoods, didn't want change, even if it helped them. Richard went himself, without guards. The crowd recognized him. The dock rat made good. They expected understanding, sympathy. Instead, he stood before them, scarred hands visible, and spoke their language. You're angry because Valerians are taking your jobs? I worked those docks. Remember who really took our jobs? Other desperate humans who'd work for less. Remember who paid us nothing? Human overseers who knew we couldn't complain. The Valerians aren't your enemy. Your enemy is anyone who profits from keeping you desperate. Someone threw a bottle. It shattered against Richard's shoulder, opening old scars. I bled for strangers when I was 17, he continued, blood running down his arm. 3 Valerian children. You know what they gave me in return? Everything. While you're fighting about who deserves what, they're trying to make sure everyone deserves something. If that threatens you, ask yourself why. The riot ended, not because they loved him, but because he'd made them think. Some joined the integration programs. Others retreated into bitter isolation. Both were choices. Richard had learned you couldn't save everyone. You could only offer the chance. Their bedroom was the only place in the palace without surveillance. Richard had insisted, knowing that even love needed privacy to survive politics. You were harsh today, Taya said, treating the bottle wound on his shoulder. I was honest. There's a difference. The Richard who saved us wouldn't have been so cold. That Richard was 17 and dying. He caught her hand. I can be the hero from your memories or the person you need, not both. Athena entered from the training grounds, sweat still glistening on her jade skin. The guard corps is fragmenting. Half think we're too soft, half think we're too harsh. Let them fragment, Richard advised. Then reform with the ones who stay. Loyalty through choice is stronger than obligation. Everything is falling apart, Freya said from the doorway, her usual harmonics discordant with stress. The people, the nobles, even us, were fighting constantly. She was right. The unity of crisis had fractured into the reality of governance. Taya wanted faster reforms. Athena wanted stronger security. Freya wanted to inspire rather than enforce. They'd started sleeping separately, meeting only for public appearances. You're not fighting, Richard corrected. You're finally being honest. You 3 spent 22 years united by a shared goal, finding me. Now you have me. Now what? Now we build the world we dreamed of, Taya said. Whose dream? Richard challenged. You each have different visions. Taya wants democracy. Athena wants meritocracy. Freya wants harmony. Those aren't the same thing. So we compromise? No. Richard stood, facing all 3. Compromise is why you're failing. You're trying to be one person with three bodies. Be three people who choose to work together. Like we were as children. You weren't united as children. Theia led. Athena protected. Freya comforted. You each did what you were good at. Do that now. They looked at each other, really looked, for the first time in months. I've been trying to make you all follow my vision, Theia admitted. I've been treating every disagreement as betrayal, Athena added. I've been manipulating instead of communicating, Freya confessed. Richard pulled them together, not as the unified force they'd tried to be, but as three individuals choosing proximity. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be honest. That night, they didn't make love. They talked, really talked, about fears, failures, the weight of expectations, about how they'd built him into a symbol in their minds and how the reality was both less and more, about how they'd built each other into roles, leader, warrior, healer, instead of seeing the complete people. I was terrified when we found you, Theia admitted. What if you'd changed? What if you hadn't? Both seemed equally frightening. I practiced killing you, Athena confessed. If you'd betrayed us, sold us to Kadron, I had 17 different plans. I used my harmonics on you, Freya whispered. Just a little, to make you want to stay. I'm sorry. Richard looked at these three women, flawed, struggling, human despite their alien skin. I tried to leave. That first night, after the arena, I made it to the spaceport before turning back. Why? Theia asked. Because running was just another kind of prison, and because... He paused, vulnerability cracking through decades of armor. Because you three are the only people who've ever looked at me and seen something worth keeping. They came together then, not as the fairy tale they'd imagined, but as something better, something real, four damaged people choosing to heal together, even when healing hurt. 2 years later, the first integrated school opened in the dock districts. Richard stood in the doorway, watching human and Valerian children share lunches, not because they were forced to, but because children didn't know they weren't supposed to. 17% increase in cross-species friendships, Athena reported, her tactical mind finding patterns even in play, projected 30% by year end. Statistics don't capture the real change, Freya said, her voice harmonizing with the children's laughter. Listen to them. They're creating new languages, mixing words from both species. The nobles are calling it corruption of pure language, Theia added, but she was smiling. Some are pulling their children from integrated schools. Let them, Richard said. They're creating their own irrelevance. A small human girl approached him, dock district obvious in her patched clothes and careful movements. She held out half a sandwich. "You're hungry too?" she asked. Richard knelt to her level. "Not anymore, but I remember being hungry." "Mama says you were like us before." She pushed the sandwich closer. "If one eats, all eat." Richard accepted the half sandwich with the gravity it deserved. The girl beamed and ran back to her mixed group of friends. "She doesn't know she just fed the prince consort," Theia observed. "Good. The day these kids see me as royalty instead of just Richard is the day we failed." But that night brought reminders that not everyone wanted integration. 3 schools burned. 12 children died, 7 human, 5 Valerian. The attackers left a message: pure blood or blood spilled. Athena wanted martial law. Freya wanted dialogue. Theia wanted investigations. They turned to Richard. "All 3, he said. Martial law in affected districts. Athena leads that. Open dialogue with moderate separatists. Freya's voice. Full investigation with public trials. Theia's justice. Use your differences as strength." It worked. Not perfectly, but better than any single approach. The extremists were caught, tried, executed. The moderates were heard, their legitimate grievances addressed. The districts were protected without becoming police states. "You're good at this," Taya said one night, watching Richard mediate between mining unions and transport guilds. "Natural leadership." "It's not leadership," Richard corrected. "It's translation. I speak both languages, desperation and power. I'm just helping each side hear the other." "That's literally what leadership is," Athena pointed out. "Then I learned it from 3 little girls who insisted on sharing their food with someone who had more than them." 5 years after the arena, Richard held his first child, a daughter with Taya's violet skin and his dark eyes. She screamed with healthy lungs while Taya recovered from 30 hours of labor. "She's perfect," Freya whispered, her harmonics soothing the baby's cries. "She's loud," Athena corrected, but her eyes were soft. "Good. She'll need to be heard in this world." They'd agreed. All children would be raised by all 4 parents, regardless of biological origin. No competition, no favorites. If one eats, all eat applied to love too. Within 2 years, there were 4 children. Athena's son, who had Richard's stubborn jaw and her tactical mind. Freya's twins, whose harmonics could shatter glass or heal hearts, depending on their mood. "Papa's home!" They screamed in unison when Richard returned from negotiating another trade agreement. He caught them all, violet, jade, golden, and mixed, lifting them with scarred arms that had once hefted containers for bread. "Who's been good?" "Me," they chorused. "Liar," Taya laughed. "They tried to liberate the kitchen cookies, said if one eats, all eat." "Can't argue with that logic," Richard said, setting them down. "But did you share with the staff?" The children looked guilty. "Forgot." "Then you only learned half the lesson. Come on." He led them to the kitchen, where they distributed their stolen cookies to surprise servants. The head cook, an elderly Thurian who'd served the old regime, watched with amazement. "The old princes would have had us beaten for eating their food," she murmured. "Good thing we're not the old princes," Richard replied, accepting a cookie from his youngest. "We're just hungry people who got lucky enough to eat regularly. The only difference between us and anyone else is circumstance." But that night, after the children slept, reality intruded. The Earth Coalition was demanding preferential trade rights, using human settlements as leverage. The Thurian Empire wanted military bases on Valerian. Everyone wanted a piece of what they'd built. "We can't fight everyone," Taya said, exhausted from managing diplomatic channels. "We don't have to," Richard said. "We just have to make fighting us more expensive than trading with us." "How?" "By being necessary. Every reform we've implemented, every integrated school, every mixed district, document it. Show the economic growth, the innovation from collaboration, then offer to help other worlds implement the same. Turn our revolution into a product." "That's mercenary," Freya said uncomfortably. "That's survival. Principles don't matter if you're dead." They packaged their revolution, literally. The Integration Protocol, they called it. A step-by-step guide to transforming segregated societies into collaborative ones. The price? Trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, resource sharing. It worked. Within a year, 17 worlds had implemented variations. Not all succeeded. Some collapsed into violence, others reverted to old ways. But enough thrived that Valerian became a symbol of possibility rather than threat. "We're selling hope," Taya marveled, watching new applications arrive. "We're selling a chance," Richard corrected. "What they do with it is their choice." Years after 3 princesses had found their dock rat, Richard stood in the Memorial District, what had once been the warehouse where he'd hidden them. Now it was a museum, a school, a reminder. His eldest daughter, Sayla, stood beside him. At 19, she was everything he'd never been, educated, confident, loved from birth. But she had his eyes, always calculating costs. "Tell me again," she requested. "The truth, not the legend." Richard looked at the display. 3 mannequin children and a teenage boy sharing bread in a hidden shelter. The plaque read, "The beginning of revolution, when kindness became policy." The truth? Richard touched his old scars through his formal clothes. I was 17, starving and angry at the universe. 3 girls needed help. I almost walked away. But you didn't. No, but not from nobility, from rage. I was furious that children were about to suffer what I'd suffered. That anger was worth more than my safety. That's not the story they tell in schools. Stories need heroes. Reality is messier. Richard turned to face his daughter fully. Your mothers searched for me for 22 years. They built me into a symbol in their minds. When they found me, I was just a bitter salvage captain who'd learned to survive by not caring. But you loved them. I learned to. They were patient enough to let me learn. He paused, watching tourists take pictures with the memorial. The fairy tale says, love conquers all. The truth is, love just makes the fight worthwhile. Selah was quiet for a moment. Do you regret it? You could have stayed among the stars, free. Richard thought of his other children preparing for their own challenges, of his wives, each brilliant and difficult and irreplaceable, of the world they'd built, imperfect but improving. Freedom is overrated, he said finally. I'd rather be bound to something worth protecting. If one eats, all eat, Selah quoted. More than that. Richard pulled her close, this daughter who'd never known hunger but understood its weight. If one loves, all love. If one fights, all fight. If one builds, all build, she finished, together. They stood in the memorial district as Valerian's 3 suns set. They'd managed to negotiate multiple suns now, a gift of advanced technology and stubborn negotiation. Around them, the integrated city pulsed with life. Human and Valerian children played in streets that had once run with blood. Former enemies shared meals in restaurants that had once been segregated. The palace, visible in the distance, stood open to any who hungered. Not perfect, never perfect, but better, always better. That night, Richard found his wives on the palace balcony, watching the city lights. They were older now, silver threading through Taea's violet, lines mapping Athena's battles, Freya's voice deeper with years of use. But they were still the 3 girls who dragged his bleeding body to safety, who'd refused to forget. The council wants to build a statue, Taea said. Of you. Absolutely not, Richard replied immediately. That's what we told them, Athena smiled. They insisted, so we compromised. How? A statue of bread, Freya explained. Just a loaf broken into 4 pieces. No names, no faces, just the symbol. Richard considered this. I can live with that. They stood together, 4 people who shouldn't exist as a unit, watching their impossible city thrive. Their children slept safely. Their enemies had become trading partners. Their revolution had become evolution. Thank you, Richard said, as he did every night. For what? They asked, as they always did. For being too stubborn to give up. For teaching me that some things are worth the cost. For proving that if one eats, all eat, they finished together. Somewhere in the city, a hungry child was being fed. Somewhere, former enemies were becoming friends. Somewhere, the impossible was becoming inevitable. All because a 17-year-old boy had shared his bread with 3 princesses. All because 3 princesses had refused to forget. All because sometimes the most unlikely promises were the ones that remade the universe. If one eats, all eat. If one loves, all love. If one dreams, all dream. Together, forever, together.